Hi guys, so in this video we're going to be looking at priming with an airbrush. So we looked at our airbrush last week. This week we're going to be doing some priming. We're going to discuss different primers, we're going to discuss a few basic techniques, and then in next week's video we're going to look at painting. So let's go for it. So, first, to begin with, please excuse the messy desk. I've got a few projects on the go, and it's just going to be too concise, but I've got enough space here to do some priming. So, what I have in front of me is my own choice. I have 4 primers. I have got a white primer, I've got a grey primer, and I've got a black primer, and I have a gloss black primer. I've also got a few little pieces that we're going to have a little play with, and of course obviously I've got my airbrush. So before we begin, we need to ask the question, do you actually need to prime? And I'm going to be honest with you, in most cases no, you don't need to prime. There's many people out there that are capable of winning awards that do not prime. The reason I always prime is because then A, I know it's done, and B, I've come across paints in the past which haven't stuck. Now you'll find that certain brands use different types of plastic. I think there's about 2 or 3 different brands of plastic here, and you may find that making this up, this paint might stick lovely to this one, but then you'll paint this and it comes off, and then you've got to go back and do all your work again. I just don't want to take that chance. That's why I prime. It's just then I know the paint will stick to the surface, but you don't have to, but you know, double check. So why do we apply a coat of primer? Well, there's 4 main reasons, and possibly a 5th. The first one is if you have any defects on the surface when you start gluing parts together. I know these go together, so if you glue a part together and it might look like a perfect fit, I know that's not a perfect fit, that's done on purpose, but if your eye says that's a perfect fit, you'll then prime over that. I need to do something about my focus, don't I? And then once you prime over that, that's really going to highlight any defects. So you know, depending on how much perfectionist you are, it will show up surface defects. The second one, which is the main reason why I prime, it enables the paint to stick to the surface. I'm not going to go into science because I'm not a scientist. I don't know the ins and outs. If you imagine this surface is smooth, and what you're going to be doing is you're applying paint to a smooth surface. The primer at a more microscopic level is a little bit more uneven. It's like having little grabby fingers, and the paint is like this. The plastic is like this, yeah, and you see it can't stick. The primer is a bit more like this. So what it's doing is it's grabbing onto the plastic on one end and it's grabbing onto the paint the other. So my hands represent the primer. Probably a really bad way to explain it, but if you look at people, anyone who painted cars knows, you must put a primer down first. The primer sticks to the metal, the paint sticks to the primer. So you're just giving it a different surface to stick to. Now the third reason is reducing the thickness of the paint. If you have, let's say for example, this is grey and you want to paint it white, because this has got a much heavier pigmentation, when you spray this on, one coat of this will give a much stronger colour than one coat of paint. So if this was black and you put one coat or two coats of this on, you may only need 2 or 3 coats of white, whereas if you put black primer, or if this, you know, if you didn't put primer down, you might need 10, 15. White's a really funny colour to paint, so you might find yourself needing 10 or 15 coats. Now, although the coats of paint are extremely thin, anyone will know 10 coats of paint is thicker than 2 coats of paint. And then the fourth reason that we have is pre-shading. Now we'll touch on pre-shading, black basing, anything, you know, post-shading, pre-shading, black basing. You will have seen it on some of my other videos, but not on this series. And I will go into that in more detail in a later video. But where you want color variations on this, let me get through one of my little side projects. So I have here a Douglas Sky Raider. Now what I want it to represent is the fact that it's been sitting on a carrier deck for you know, probably at least half of the time. It's not constantly in the air. When it's parked up, it's going to be having the sun on it, and what I want it to represent there was that the sun has bleached some of the panels and lightened the colour, but at the same time, where you've got panel lines and it's not completely flat, the muck would have accumulated in there. So this bit is a little bit dirtier and this bit is a little bit lighter, and by doing pre-shading we can represent that quite easily. So you see we've got all the colour variation, and the easiest way to do that colour variation is to do it at primer level. Paints are partially, what's the word I'm looking for, translucent. They're not fully opaque. You know, whatever colour you have underneath the paint will show through. So you know, you can take one simple colour by applying the number of layers that you apply, the different colours underneath, how many layers of paint underneath the main colour. You know, you might be able to get 10 or 15 different shades just from a single coat of colour. Right, so what we're going to do today then is we're going to do a little bit of priming. Priming is extremely simple. Now everyone that tells you how to prime will quite possibly give you a different method, so I'm going to give you my method. I don't know if there's an official name for it, but I call it a 3-pass system. And what the 3 passes are is that first of all you're just going to go over very lightly just to get the primer onto the surface, and then you're going to go over again once it's dry, and you're just going to make sure you've got 100% coverage, and then you'll do what I call a wet layer, which is a good layer. Now one of the great things about primers is that they're extremely forgiving. If you spray the paint on, spray the primer on too thick, you normally won't lose it. Obviously if you poured the whole bottle on, you know, but if you put a thick layer on, it will still preserve the details, and in a lot of cases it will show the details up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this one last because I want to do something a little bit different with that. So I'll take these wings and I'll do one in white, one in grey. I'm going to do both of these in grey. So one in grey and then one in black, because then what I want to do is I want to show you a little bit of pre-shading, and then this will be done another colour, probably black, just to show you different things. And this is going to be done in different colours because I want to show you the gloss black. So why have I got different colours and what colours are available? Well, the colours available are let's just say infinite. Different companies are bringing out new colours, and if you want to paint something green, a lot of people might just be using a green primer, because then half the job is done just at the primer level. As to keep it simple, if you're trying to just put a colour down, then you're going to go for a grey primer. A grey primer, funnily enough, this comes out a lot lighter than the bottle suggests. But grey is a neutral colour, so if you put a red on a grey, you will get red. If you put white on, it will lighten the colour, and obviously if you put black on, it will darken the colour. Now the reason I use gloss black is, again, I don't know the science behind it, but when you're painting metallics such as silver, gold, brass, etc., metallics always work better with a gloss black. I think the science being something to do with reflecting the light back up through the metallic. So obviously you get the light hits the top surface and that's what you see, but also because they're slightly translucent, some of the light is coming through, and because this is a gloss, that light is then getting bounced back, so you then get a double light coming through the metallics. Now I've gone almost into professor status there, which I didn't really want to do, but that's all good. So yeah, let's start off with a white primer. Keep it nice and simple. I also wanted to show you some little bit, I might do it later on, but I just need to find some figures. So as with everything, always shake your bottles, make sure everything is nice and even. Normally I'd say use a spray booth. Because I'm only going to be doing a tiny bit of spraying, I'm going to be very lazy. And one thing that is extremely advised, and I don't do this all the time, is to wear a glove. Now, paints being acrylics, they just seem very easy to wash off your hands, but gloves I think are a must with primers, because it's just really too difficult to get off your hands. And I do like to use a glove when I'm spraying, because then you can use the glove and spray on the back of your hand if you're trying to get a paint thin, and you can just give a little bit of a spray on the back of your hand and just see how concentrated that paint is. Right, so let's start off with, we'll pop a little bit of white primer on. Let's start with a grey, let's keep it simple. And this is like your everyday primer. If you only own one primer, I would suggest you own a grey. And most of this particular one you don't need to. I haven't come across a primer that you need to thin. You can thin them, but you generally don't need to. So what I'm about to say now applies not just with primers but also with painting. It is extremely important to keep your nozzle 90 degrees to the piece. Let's do the inside. I should have done a black primer, shouldn't I? Let's see how dark that is. Right, let me just pop a bit of black in there just to I'm after the colour variation, you see. If I spray grey on that, you won't see anything. Right, so if you spray at 90 degrees, but not like that, can you see that you get a perfect circle? If you spray at an angle, what's going to happen as soon as that paint hits the surface, the air that's coming through is going to blow it, and you're going to get spidering. So can you see how that's gone all up? So you need to keep, I think I need to clean this airbrush. So you need to keep it, let's see, at 90 degrees, and then as you spray, because there's nowhere, or the only place for the paint to go is outwards. You also notice that that's drying a lot quicker, that's taking a lot longer, that's more of a wet coat, and because I've just sort of hammered it, but it's probably just as easy to show you on a piece of paper. But there's a nice 90 degrees, and that's spraying at an angle, and you see it's quite messy. And obviously you know that if this is the point of impact, this is where most of the paint is, and then it's spreading up there, and you could just tell that it's not going to be an even surface. So let me stop my camera. I'll do a quick clean out on the in fact, now we'll carry on with the black, because it's probably easier to go with the black to show you. So I'll just and I do apologise about the noise. I have the compressor going. Obviously I need that compressor for the airbrush. There's not an awful lot I can do about that. So we'll start off with black, and the first thing we're gonna do, I was trying to find a nice piece. Now you don't need to cut the pieces off the sprue, and I normally always do. You can spray on or off the sprue, but do bear in mind that if you that piece there, if it's, I mean that's not going to be visible, but this piece there will be. And when you cut that, obviously you're then going to have a little bit you might have to touch up. So right, we have our primer ready, we have our piece, and then so this is, for me, this is a 3-stage process. So the first stage is dusting. So what I do is I just nice and lightly, I go over the piece, and I just get a nice little bit of coverage all over. And normally I find a lot of these models, the plastic is shiny. So if you, I'll try and get the shine on. See that's shiny plastic, and what I've done there is I've just taken most of the shine off. Yeah, like you see, there's hardly any shine there. So it's just a light dusting, just to get a little bit of primer down. This will dry extremely quickly because it's a nice light coat. And there we go. Just really just to get a light dusting, and you see that there's not really any shine on it. So then we go in with the second coat, and what we're looking at is just to make sure every bit is covered. And then this will obviously take on the colour of the primer. And again, this coat is going to dry nice and quickly because it's a nice thin layer. So I'm going to stop there so you can see the difference between the first, just the dusting, and the second layer. And then by now you'll have figured out which pieces are hard to cover and which pieces aren't. And then once that's dry, you can now go in with a wet coat, which is a good blast. Don't flood it, but a good blast. And that was blocked. So we're going to cover that. You see that? That's wet. And that's going to take a minute or two to dry because there's a good solid layer of primer. And then once we've primed all our pieces, obviously we need to put that somewhere where the wet surfaces aren't going to touch anything. You can use the airbrush to dry. Sorry, like if you just use just the airbrush, use the air. Let me get that, and then you can just go over with the airbrush, just the air, and you'll see that dries that up. I tend to not do that with primer. I let the primer dry naturally, but you can. And I don't know if you've noticed what I've noticed, but the detail on these, I think these are tail flaps. The detail is just starting to pop already because it's really shown. In effect, let's call it a defect because it's not level with the surface. So now that panel line, it just starts to show and that's what it would do with the defects. If there was a scratch on there that was deep enough, suddenly the scratch will appear. So now you can have a good look, and that I'm happy with. So let's I'm going to stop the camera. I'm going to do this one in black actually. I'm going to do the other two, and I want to do one in white, one in grey, one in black. So I'll do quickly clean out my airbrush, change the colour. Normally what I wanted to do was I wanted to do a white primer first, and then do the grey, and then do the black, and then I thought, oh, I'll do the grey. Obviously going from a lighter to a dark is a bit easier to clean the brush out, because if you go from black to white, if you've got one tiny drop of black left in there, that's going to mix with that and make it grey. Whereas if you've got one tiny drop of white and you put black in, it's not going to make so much difference. So let me clean this out and I will join you in a second. Okay, so I've got a nice clean airbrush. So we'll do the grey next, because that's a nice neutral colour, and then that can show you the problem that we have with grey and using grey plastic. Right, little bit of grey primer. I'm going to put not so much in because it took me ages to clean that brush out. So grey primer, and I'm going to do these two wings in 4 different colours, because I want to show you in the next video the effect it has on the paint. That's not good. Right. So grey primer, we'll just do the inside. So actually this is a very light plastic, much lighter than I'm used to working with. So there's the first layer, which is just a dusting, and then we'll go over again, make sure we've covered everything. There we go, and then we'll give it a nice solid layer. And there we go. And I'm gonna purposely go over too much on this. There you go. I've flooded that a little bit, and you like, even when it's wet, you can still see the detail. So it's a little bit forgiving. So what I'll do is I'll switch down now to a white primer. Just give my airbrush a quick clean. Here's my bottle of thinners. I think I might be better off just switching the camera off while I switch primers. When you, I normally do a quick clean when I do a colour change, and for some reason today a quick clean is not happening quite so quick. Right, so still not quite there, so I've got another little cheat, which is put a little bit of the colour in, mix it, spray it through. That's brilliant. Right, so now I have a white primer, and I just want to show you something else as well. Be careful that you make sure you hit every surface, because you see I've got there some grey overspray. I want it to go up roughly up to that line, and you see I've got some overspray, but if you turn it around, I've clearly missed that line. So if you're priming this in one colour, you need to make sure you're rotating the part. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that with I'll do this bit white because this bit's still drying. So white primer, and this is obviously going to lighten everything up. So a little light dusting. In fact, that's a little bit heavy, but that's fine. Some people go straight in with a heavy. So a little bit more. And there is a little bit of the grey in the white, which is why it's a little bit grey. But that's fine. So then I'll go in with heavier. And this one I can actually purposely overspray So that is extremely heavy. That's far heavier than I would go. And if you were going that in relation that heavy with a brush, you would just lose all that detail. But you'll see that detail will still be there. I'm not doing any more primer. I'm just doing a little bit of air. Don't go in too close if it's a thick coat, because all you'll do is just blow the paint everywhere and you'll get spidering. So I just want to get that drying off a little bit, and then what I'll do is I'll do another clean. I'll do a colour change, and then we'll do a little bit of black, and we'll do a little bit of gloss. Okay, so next up, I've actually gone for the gloss black next. This will help with metallics. As you see, I don't use it so much, so I buy a smaller bottle, and it's really pointless using it for ordinary paints, because it's not, it's not going to have that metallic effect. But you'll still, if you use one of these primers, you will still get a good result with a metallic, but this will just improve it a little bit. But because I want to do some other work with the black, I'm just going to skip to the gloss black, and again exactly the same. Now I find this gloss black is quite nice, because when you do the dusting coat, it doesn't really come up that shiny. So it's quite useful, and of course the drawback with gloss is that you can't tell when it's dry. A matte paint will be glossy when it's wet, and as it dries it goes matte. A gloss paint will be glossy when it's wet and glossy when it's dry. So, but I find also really thin layers, the gloss really doesn't come through. So it's just useful that when you do the dusting, I know there's going to be some overspray. So on to the second stage, which is just making sure I get good coverage. You see that I've made sure I get that little bit that's sticking up. And then once I'm happy with that, you can go in quite heavy. And this is where the overspray comes in, you see, because I'm just forcing so much of it out. But that's fine, because what we'll do is when we do the comparison, we'll compare the ends. And then a nice good coat, we'll finish it off, and that should dry nice and glossy, and you just won't be able to tell if it's wet or dry. Right, so that's the gloss primer done. So I'll just switch out. Yeah, I've timed that absolutely perfect. I put I waste quite a lot of paint because I can't judge how much paint to put into the paintbrush, into the airbrush, and obviously I end up wasting all that paint. But that particular time, I got pretty much just the right amount of paint. So let's do a little bit of black. Yeah, I'm rather pleased with that. That's come out rather nice. But I find that one is a little bit more shiny rather than glossy. Right, so black primer. Right, so what we'll do is we'll prime the other half of this wing in black. So again, exactly the same process as before. We do just a light dusting, just to get most of it covered. Yeah, and it's going to dry super quick because the layer is so thin, and we've achieved that by not pulling back. Do you remember I said about these brushes being dual action? So I don't know if you'll be able to see the spray, but look, there's paint coming out now, but you can't really see it. Now if I really pull back, you still can't see. How good is that? Right, so yeah, just not pulling back much. Maybe just a tiny bit more than last time. We're going for full coverage. We want everything covered. Yeah, any bits that we've missed should be showing up now. And there we go. It's a good coverage there, but it's not super brilliant. And then for our last layer, we can go nice and thick. And there we go. Again, I've sort of pulled back on this. Right, and then if we go back to our white primer, can you remember I did that really super thick? And that there's no loss of detail there. Obviously there's a bit of overspray there, but so even though I went really thick on that particular primer, didn't really lose much detail, so that's good. Right, so there's our 4 basic primers. You can get coloured primers. You see this one is going nice and glossy, so we've got white, gloss black, black and grey, and they're your basic primers. And I'll use these pieces in the next video when we do some painting, so you'll be able to see the difference it makes. I have deliberately left these, and I want to do 2 things with these. I just want to touch on shading. You see, remember I'm talking about detail on the parts, and I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to do on one I'm going to do a bit of pre-shading, and on the other one I'm going to do a bit of black basing. So for pre-shading, all we want to do, all these little lines there that you want them to show, what you're going to do, and you can do this with paint or you can do it with a different colour. We want to just get in there and we want to just run. Doesn't have to be neat, but we want to colour those lines in, and that's all we're doing. And let's see, I missed there, so I went back over it, but that's fine. The end result is that you're getting black in the middle, and then you're getting it graduating back to the normal colour the further it comes out. So as long as there is actually paint in the middle of the line and all the lines are covered, there aren't many panel lines on this, but I might do a better job on the other side. There we go. And then what we'll do when we come to paint that, we will paint that with really thin layers of paint. And as you can imagine, black is going to take longer to fully, it'll take more coats to fully cover than the grey. So what we're hoping for is, as we get our intended colour spot on in the middle, this will be a little bit darker, and there'll be a nice transition on the panel lines. Finish this bit up. I just noticed a bit I missed. There we go. Right, so this is pre-shading. Now, unfortunately, I need it to be black for black basing, hence the name black basing. Oh, another thing I want to say here is, you don't have to use the black, and in a minute I'm gonna use a white. You don't need to use the white. What you need is a dark colour. So if, for example, if I'm painting this, if the end result is going to be brown, I may actually consider using a very, very dark brown for the panel lines, and a creamy colour instead of the white, so that the colours will blend a little bit differently. If you're doing green, use a very dark green and a very almost yellow. But for simplicity, I'm just showing you black. So just being too much of a... Right, so for black basic, what you need to do, as the name suggests, you need to base it in black. So we don't need to go through... if you were going straight in with a primer, if this was a bare plastic and I knew I was going to do black basing, then obviously I would prime it in exactly the same way as this. But it's already been primed, so don't need to go through the 3 stages. I just need to get a good full cover on the black, just making it black or dark, whichever colour I'm using. And I'm actually using this as a colour more than a primer, but obviously to save myself time, I would do this with a primer, because it's primer and first layer paint all in one go. So there we are, we've based it in black, hence it's called black basing. Now what we want to do next, apart from clean out our airbrush, we want our panels to be lighter. Now most cases you do black basing, you don't want a uniform colour. So when you apply the white, what you're going to do is you're going to apply it unevenly, and this is where your artistic funness comes in. The method I first saw and the method that I use is we're just going to draw squiggly lines, but I also know that what I like to do is I like it to be lighter right in the middle, so I might do squiggly lines and then I might do a little bit at the end, and just go crazy, guys. That's all you have to do. Let me just flush my airbrush out with water, just to make sure I'm giving it a bit of a double clean because I seem to be having a bit of a struggle. So I've got my black, which is an extreme dark colour, so it could be dark grey, dark green, dark red, whatever. And now I'm going for the other extreme, which in this case is white, but it could be a light green, light blue, light red, whatever colour you're using. So, and what we're going to do, whereas on this one, the pre-shading, we hit the panel lines, this one we're actually going to avoid the panel lines. So what we're going to do, we want a very nice fine stream, and we're just going to go mental. Are you ready, guys? And that's it. So just make random patterns. There's nothing planned about that, I just whatever I felt like doing at the time. And then where, in fact, like that one's gone a bit light now, so I'm going to go over that again. Now I've seen people that just go over the whole thing white, and the results have come out really good. I personally just like to avoid the panel lines. So it's effectively a photo negative. Can you see there, you've got the black lines, and there, and this obviously is going to take a little bit longer to do, and there we go. So I'm hitting the edges a bit more because that's usually where the light would be doing most of the bad work on the bleaching, and obviously it also depends how much damage you want done here. But keep it random, don't keep it a uniform pattern, because random isn't, well, it's random. There you go, and you can go as light as dark as you want. I like a little bit more white on the middle, on the larger panels, but there you go, it is effectively doing the opposite. This is you're just doing the panel lines, this you're doing everything but the panel lines. Now what I'm going to suggest to you is, having seen this, or even possibly giving it a go, if you can't see much difference between the two, probably do the panel, the pre-shading, because this is a little bit more work, and you know, you need to feel you're getting the results out for the work. But that is priming. Oh yeah, I did that. So that is priming, guys. Why we prime, why have I got a bit of white on there? So why we prime, what the results we can get. I haven't touched any paint yet, and a lot of my job is half done. So I'm going to do a quick stop of the camera there, because I want to show you something else. I just need to go and find a figure for it. But this is more for figure painting, the effects we can have with primers. Okay, so the next technique I want to show you is a process called zenithal highlighting. Now what zenithal highlighting is forcing a highlight from a well, the dictionary definition is relating to or located at or near the zenith, or showing correct directions from the center. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight this ready for painting. Just a little figure. It's only partially built, but it's just enough to show you the technique. And what we're going to do is we're going to show a light source from I always use 45 degrees from above. So what we'll do is we'll begin by priming as normal all over in black. So let me get my my little poor man's spray booth, as I like to call it, the kitchen roll, and we'll do an all over black. And now my airbrush has picked the best time in the world to clog up. Right, I have to cut the camera and sort the airbrush out. Okay, that was easy. It turned out it wasn't so much it was blocked, it was the nozzle on the end wasn't done up enough. Right, so we'll do an all over prime, making sure we get into every single nook and cranny. And what you'll notice is as you prime, it will begin to pick up some detail. There's just detail, it looks flat, and then as you prime, it will suddenly show all the detail, just like it did with the aircraft wing. Remember when we saw the panel line? And exactly the same as before, if we should accidentally shoot a bit too much primer on, it's fine, it won't hide the detail, because the primer is super thin. It's like painting with extremely thin paint layers. So there we go. So what's going to happen is at the end of the process of painting, the parts that were primed black will leave the paint very dark, and then the next step is going to be grey, which is going to be in mid-tones, and that's not really going to affect the paint too much. And then all the parts that we're going to finish up with white will brighten the paint a little bit. So just let that dry, and I think it'd probably be best if we just let that dry, and I'll make a cut. That's the bit I missed, and I'll come back to it in a moment. Okay, so we've let our model dry, and this time what I've done is I've loaded up my airbrush with grey primer. Now what we're going to do here is going to differ in one way. Normally when we prime, we're manipulating the model and the airbrush, and we're getting into every single area that we can. For the grey and the white, we're going to be totally go completely against that. We need to keep the airbrush at a 45-degree angle. If we move the model, we need to move the airbrush, and we can't come in like this. It's got to be kept at around about 45-degree angle. And what we're going to do is we're just going to come in like so, and we're going to continue priming, keeping that airbrush at a 45-degree angle. Doesn't have to be exactly 45, but it has to be thereabouts. And what you're going to find is when you finish with the grey, you've suddenly picked up lots of detail already, look. So we've got areas down here where the airbrush is impossible to reach, because it's been shielded by the top of the cloak, so the airbrush hasn't got in. And then suddenly any lower areas and suddenly we've got all that detail. So all that detail you probably couldn't see on camera is now all of a sudden it's there. We've got the folds on the cloak. You see underneath the pillar we've got the lines on that pillar. This is exactly why I picked this model, because it's extremely high in detail, and I knew after the black primer it wouldn't probably show too well, but after the grey it would be fine. So we'll do one more coat of highlight, which is going to be the white, and I'll just change my the colour on my airbrush. Okay, so I've switched my airbrush out to white primer. As you can see, I've got hardly any in them, and that's because we're going to hardly be using any. So whereas with the black primer we were doing all over, and with the grey we kind of hit it at a 45-degree angle, this time we're going to hit it at around about somewhere between 0 and 10 degrees. I aim for about 10 degrees. Don't be tempted to do this. Just like if you remember we did with the grey primer, we were moving the model, and we pretty much want to do the same. So we're going to be moving like this, and we're going to be catching the upper surfaces. So obviously it's quite natural to work with your airbrush at 45 degrees, so you want to work with this at about 45 degrees. So we'll just go over with the white airbrush, with the white primer, and we'll just be catching those upper surfaces. And like I say, I'm saying 0 to 10 degrees because if you just come off a little bit, that's fine. It's kind of a high noon. And there we go. So, and that's literally it. There's hardly any on the white, so it almost looks a little bit like a snow scene. And so we've got all our lower surfaces which are in shadow. They're all nice and dark. Then we've got our mid-tones. Now when we apply a layer of paint to that, you can see that, say for example, when you do this cloak, without any work whatsoever with the paint, you just put one even layer, you're now going to get 3 shades of paint. Now this technique obviously isn't going to be used quite so much with scale model aircraft. It's, as you can see from what's in my hand, it's pretty much going to be figure painting or anything with an extremely high amount of detail. There are techniques that we can take this even further. If you had a model of, say, something that naturally doesn't wear clothes, like a giant or an animal, what you would perhaps do is you would be using the brown spectrum of colours with a very thin red over the top, and that creates a nice warm zenithal highlight. Then you start painting your skin tones over the top, and then you get your natural warmth from your body which comes through on the skin. But this is a basic zenithal highlight. So although I did it all over, what I'm now going to do, well, what I'm not going to do, but what I would do as I paint this, I'm forcing highlights more from a front perspective. And the reason I personally choose the front is it's psychological. You're playing a game, you're going to have your figures facing your opponent. The better, this is my belief, some people might disagree, but I believe the better your painted figures are, the more your player thinks that you're really good, and it psychs him out, and once he gets into his brain that he's going to lose, doesn't matter how bad you are a player, he's going to lose. It's just a little bit of a psychological thing. But yeah, if you can get a nicely painted figure, and it looks good on the table. So there you go, guys. So what we have covered in this video, we've covered the basics of priming. We've done a white primer there, which hasn't come back very good because of the overspray from the black. We've done a grey primer, we've done a black primer. We've covered the fact that different companies will do different colour primers. If you're doing a grey aircraft, if you're doing a grey aircraft, I'd perhaps think about a grey primer. If I'm doing black basing or panel lining, we're looking at using the different colour primers. Now if you're doing, say for example, a green aircraft, you might look at using a green primer. If you're doing figures, you might want to look at certain colours. I know that there's a game out there that's all about futuristic tanks and things. So there's a lot of tanks being built, so they might take use of the coloured primers. What we've then done is we've used a gloss primer, which we're going to demonstrate in a future video the effect that has on the metallic. And what I'm actually keen to do is paint half of all of this and all of this in a metallic colour, and then we can do a comparison on how we feel that metallics come out, and then we'll take an ordinary colour on the other half, and then we can do a comparison and see how we feel the colour's been affected by the different primers. And this is probably going to get
saved for a much future video. Really, I'm not a big fan on airbrush painting figures, getting in all these details and controlling the airbrush. It's far too difficult for me, but I will certainly use the airbrush for priming, because look, most of my work has been done before I've even dipped a paintbrush into water. So let's see if I can switch my camera. Oh, that worked for a change. I've said on some other videos I've had a bit of trouble setting up my camera scenes. I can get rid of this glove. It's a really hot day and my hands really do sweat. So guys, I hope you have enjoyed that video. If there's anything you feel that I've left out, please leave a comment below. Ask the questions. If there's anything you want covered in a future video, then please make the suggestion. I'm trying to keep this interesting for everyone. I feel some of the videos aren't as engaging as I'd want them to be. Obviously I make the video as a YouTube creator, but then I watch them all back as a YouTube viewer, and obviously it's hard for me because I've seen it about 50 times by the time you guys have, and you know, I feel if I'm losing a bit of interest, then maybe so are you. So please help me to keep these videos as interesting as possible. So next week we will be doing painting with an airbrush. So what we'll do is we'll get a couple of interesting colours. We'll do a little bit of painting on these aircraft wings that we've just done, and then in the following week, obviously I'm going to clean this airbrush, but I'll show you how I clean an airbrush, and then that will take us into July. Unless you guys say anything else, I'm planning on doing an introduction to paints and primers from a brush point of view. You don't have to use a primer, and you don't have to use a primer with an airbrush. I personally find I just noticed I'm a bit of an OCD with my bottles. If I see my bottles are a bit gunky, I can't help but clean them. So I find that the problem I get is there aren't really many good primers that are suitable for brushwork, but I have a cheat, but you're going to have to wait till July to see that. Right guys, so as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me just do a quick, I noticed a common issue I have with my outros. I have to end up editing them because of where they're positioned on the OBS. But right guys, so next week we're going to be getting the airbrush out again, and then we're going to clean, and then hopefully I've given you enough information to be able to answer the question, is an airbrush suitable for me? I think it is, because otherwise I wouldn't have bought an airbrush and I wouldn't continue using an airbrush. But it would be nice if I can give you all the enough opinion for you to make your mind up. So guys, take care, and I will catch you in another video. Ta-ra.